Hello again, everyone, and welcome back to Reddit Aliens. I'm John, and as always, thank you so much for being here. Good topic? Let's do it. What horrible thing did you witness that stayed with you for a long time? Please remember to like, share, and subscribe. I was an EMT for 5 years. I saw lots of messed up stuff, but the one that haunts me still is this. An old man goes crazy and shoots his wife. He then calls 911 and mumbles about cats. We arrive on scene and I see a cop at the top of the stairs. His face is ghost white. I get up there to find the wife in bed with the back of her head blown off. Worst part? She's still alive, physically, anyway. We attempt to keep her alive, but there's nothing we can do. Her brains are all over the board. She's making crying noises until she dies in the back of the ambulance. I still get nauseous thinking about it. Her husband was sitting outside the whole time we were in the house mumbling about cats. I don't know whatever happened. When I was 19, I had to pull my girlfriend of 3 years out of a car accident. I know technically you're not meant to, but I was terrified that the car was going to catch fire. She died minutes later, and there was nothing I could have done about it. It took me about a year of completely destroying and rebuilding myself to even begin to get over it. I'm still not fully over it 4 years later. I watched my friend get hit and killed by a car in the 8th grade. He died en route to the hospital, but beside the initial blood, it wasn't gory. It's something that stuck with me ever since, but it hasn't caused any problems in my life. It's just a fucked-up situation that happens in front of your eyes when you're a kid. The look on his mother's face as she ran up to me and my other friend at the scene haunts me to this day. When I was little, like 4 or 5, I couldn't sleep, so I got out of bed and walked out of the living room where my parents were watching a movie. All I remember was this man pulling the skin off of an alien. The man then gets dragged by aliens through this tunnel. Scared the crap out of me. Ever since then, I've been freaked out by aliens. I learned recently that the name of the movie was Fire in the Sky, based on a man's story of what happened to him while he was in the White Mountains in Arizona, where I live. A family friend of mine had a broken gun his dad gave him. He would jokingly point it at people and pull the trigger and watch them flip out for entertainment. I did not approve. I walked into his room one day and he pointed it at me. So I flipped out on him, telling him how dangerous that was and that if he ever pointed a gun at me, joke or not, I would beat the shit out of him. I'm 5 or so years older than him. We grew up together our whole lives. He tells me to calm down, telling me the gun doesn't work. I didn't listen. I was still lecturing him about gun safety. He got mad and said it doesn't work and put the gun to his head and pulled the trigger. It went off. It happened 2 feet away from me. I saw everything. He lived on life support for about a week before his dad finally let him go. His head was the size of a pumpkin. I had discovered a car wreck one night. The vehicle was facing eastbound in a westbound lane. The driver was not wearing a seatbelt, was thrown around in the car, and ended up being half ejected from the back window. Not only was his torso cut pretty badly from the glass, almost in half, but his head was hanging by a thread. Bad terminology, I apologize. The sight alone was unnerving, but the thing that got me the most was the smell. I've never smelled anything like it before, and if I never do again, I'll be lucky. I had a lot of nightmares after that, and even if I smell blood from a small cut, it reminds me of this. At the bar with friends, one heads home a bit early, and we head to his place for after drinks. Drunkenly crashed through the bedroom door to find him just standing there with a blank look, a small smile, and holding the knife he had just used to slash his wrists and arms apart. I got him to the hospital in time, but I still can't shake the look on his face. I was in the Navy for 9 years. I did 3 deployments, all of them on the USS Abraham Lincoln, CVN 72. My first deployment was in the fall of 2004. We were in Hong Kong for Christmas. I'm not 100% sure of the day that we pulled out of port. I think it was the 27th. We were supposed to go to Korea after Hong Kong, but when we pulled out of port, we turned south. We all heard about the tsunami, and it wasn't hard to figure out where we were going. When we got to Sumatra, off the coast of Banda Aceh, we first went to the side of the island that the current was pushing toward. The water was filthy and full of debris. It didn't really occur to us for what would be floating in the water. While I was working on the flight deck, just after we had gotten there, I heard a yell from one of the catwalks. I headed over, thinking someone had gotten hurt or messed something up on an aircraft. When I got to the catwalk, there was a group of people pointing at the water. I looked down and saw a lot of debris, but I couldn't really identify anything. Then I saw a kind of pale-colored blob. It took a second to focus, but then I realized that I was looking at the corpse of a baby. It was missing a leg, but the diaper was still on. At that point, my mind just turned off and wouldn't let me have a conscious thought about it. Later that night, I was out in one of the smoking areas, leaning on the railing and just kind of numbly staring at the water. I had kind of a weird, ominous feeling that something bad was going to happen. I was trying to shake it off as I was just a bit shocked from seeing the baby earlier. And just as I had started to calm down a bit, I saw another corpse. This one of a woman. All of the clothes had been shredded, the body was pale and bloated, and the head was gone. We spent about a month off the coast of Banda Eka. We used the ship's desalinization plant to produce fresh water, which we shipped ashore. We also used our stores of food and medical supplies to give aid to the survivors. Our helicopters flew from the first light until it was too dark to see. We actually lost a helicopter while we were there. It was about 300 feet up, lost power, and dropped into a rice field. Everyone survived. The worst injury was a dislocated hip. A good friend of mine was supposed to be on that helo, but swapped with someone else at the last minute. Those of us who were willing got the chance to go ashore and help with the relief effort. We would fly in on a helicopter in the morning and spend the day helping to load supplies onto trucks and helicopters to be distributed to those that needed them. While we were flying in, I watched the shore come toward us. We flew over what looked like a very dirty beach, the kind where currents have pushed trash up or where people just dump things. We got a little farther in and I started seeing straight lines, squares, and rectangles. I realized that I was looking at the remains of a town. It had been razed to the foundations by the waves. I don't have a photographic memory, but I have snapshots of certain things that will never leave me. 3 of them are the images of the 2 corpses and the little squares barely sticking up out of the mud. It's been almost 8 years, and I can still see them like they were yesterday. It probably happened 4 years ago, just after I got my driving license, and I was driving back home on a rainy day in March. At some point, I got passed by a motorcycle that was driving about 130 to 140 km/h. Who uses km/h, right? On the road that had a speed limit of 90 km/h. It just seemed like a green wasp flying past my left so fast that I only caught a glimpse of it. All I could think was, well, this dumbass is just asking for it. 5 minutes later, I was passing the scene of body parts all over the road and a motorcycle that was deep inside the back of a truck. The guy's body was in bits around the rear, and his head was rolling in front of the truck. And the truck was an old piece of Russian machinery that was made to be literally indestructible. Needless to say, there was an ambulance on its way to scrape him off the asphalt. After that, I've pretty much been on my toes around any motorcycles, trying to keep as much distance as I can. Also, it got quite scared off of driving for a week or so. Basic training. One of the lads training with me decided to turn the rifle on me, round in the chamber, and started telling me he hated me, despised me, and flat out felt disgusted to be around me. The idea that someone on my side could do that scared the shit out of me. Death doesn't scare me. The idea that someone I be shoulder to shoulder with could be that effing screwy worried me to no end. It played hell with my head for a few years, actually. Most of my issues stemmed from the forces, and I'm effing glad to be rid of them now. When I was about 9 or 10, I was in the car with my mom on the way back from the supermarket, and we drove these kids whacking an overturned box with sticks. Curious, my mom slowed down a bit, and as she did, the kids lifted the box to reveal this tiny ginger kitten, which they proceeded to beat to death with the sticks. My mom got out and tried to save it, but by the time she got back in the car, it was just a sad, bloody mess. I couldn't drive down the road for a long time after that. This may not be that terrible compared to seeing someone's head pop off, but one thing that stuck with me for a while was that a few years ago a coworker's daughter gave birth to a stillborn child. That's terrible in and of itself, but what they did afterwards just kind of freaked me out a bit. Apparently they thought it would be a good idea to let the family members that were there hold the dead baby. And someone else thought it would be a good idea to take pictures of the family holding the dead baby. And then she thought it would be a good idea to bring those pictures to work and show them to coworkers. Yeah, walking up on a group of coworkers and having them tell you that their dead grandchild in their pictures kind of burned those pictures into my brain. Jesus, nothing nearly as bad as that, but I was driving someone to the airport while it was raining pretty heavily. On the interstate, I got cut off by a vehicle, causing me to swerve. The back end of the car hit the front end of a semi. My car was wrapped to the front of the semi, such that the driver's side window was touching the Mac insignia on the grille. I was pushed for what seemed like forever before the truck could slow down. My car then disengaged, and the wheels tried to autocorrect, slamming themselves into the median. If I hadn't been raining, my car would have flipped, and I would probably be dead. My parents picked me up and took my friend to the airport. After he disembarked, I broke down crying. I was probably still in shock. I went home and slept for the rest of the day. Obviously, it took me a while to drive while it was raining. I saw my great-grandmother after she passed away when I was 14. She was 80 years old and had been very sick for a couple of months prior to her death. She had lost a lot of weight and almost looked like a different person toward the end. My parents and I got the call that she had passed. I was heartbroken that morning. A few hours later, I went with my great-grandparents' house thinking that hospice and the family had taken her away. Oh no, she was still there. Nobody bothered to mention that to me when I went into the house. There she was, the withered shell of my beloved great-grandmother. Her mouth was open, as were her eyes. That image haunted my dreams for years afterwards. I was driving home from work one day, and this guy had his dog tied to a leash in the back of his pickup truck. Nothing really new there, it's Georgia. Anyway, we got stopped at a red light with me directly behind him, and the dog jumps out still tied up. The guy bolts off, and I speed up to shout at him out the window that he was literally hanging his dog and dragging it to death on the road. I got him to stop, but holy Christ, poor doggy. When I was like 7 or 8, I was at the park with my friend. We were skipping rocks across the lake when a gaggle of geese came from around the bend. My friend took a rock and skipped it at one of them. It skipped twice, then banked up into the air and hit a goose directly in the head. His neck snapped and he fell to the side. He started honking and screaming in pain, swimming over to the shore where we were. He was trying to lift his head, but he couldn't, and when he got close enough, I saw the hole in his head where the rock hit him. I could see his brain. I ran away as fast as I could, but the image and sound were burned into my memory. I'm crying while writing this, because to this day, it's one of the saddest things I've ever seen. Luckily, I've never seen a human die, but this goose was seriously effed up. I called animal control when I got home, but I doubt they did anything. Later in college, I rescued a baby goose egg and hatched it in my room. Eggy Fowler, the baby goose, was a good gift, and raising him made me feel better about the goose I saw die. So, similar but different, I was an adult and we were playing slow-pitch softball by a lake, and there's a fence, and one of my teammates had hit a ball. I mean, he wasn't doing it on purpose, we were in a game. And it was a home run, went over the fence, and it just had like a laser beam right onto a goose, and the same thing happened. It hit its head and it bent over, and we had to put it out of its misery. It was an accident, but it was terrible, and I still remember it, and that's like 20 years ago. Man. I saw my mom bent over, cleaning out the fireplace one night to build a fire. My father, who was drunk as usual, was holding a shotgun up against his chin. He said, "Dare me?" And she said, "Don't be stupid." I wasn't too concerned because we routinely had to talk to my father about suicide. A few weeks before, he had driven his truck into a tree and said it was because I didn't love him. Then, however, he pointed the gun at my mother. She lowered her head and looked away. She said nothing. And out of fear, I turned and hid behind the wall in the kitchen. I heard her scream and the sound of a gunshot. He missed it, but the whole experience is in the top 5 worst experiences ever, and still F's with my head. When I was around 8, I'd been at work with my dad. He's a golf pro who works at a course, so I used to practice on the range while he was teaching. It was about 9 p.m. and we're halfway home When we pull over in the car, I ask why, and he points to the side of the road. There sat a bunny rabbit. Its back half had been hit by a car and was slightly mangled and twisted. It sat there on the side of the road, twitching its nose and staring at me. My dad grew up on a farm. He decided he had to put this bunny out of its misery. He goes to the boot of the car, pulls out his 9-iron, and approaches the bunny. I sit bewildered. I'm a massive animal lover, but at this age, I couldn't comprehend putting an animal out of its misery. I still thought my dad was just killing the bunny, when we could have easily taken it to the vet to be fixed. He widened his stance, placed the back of the iron beside the bunny's head, pulls back, and bam! There was a horrible popping or quenching sound, and my dad shouted, "4?" For weeks, I wouldn't talk to him. I cried myself to sleep a few nights afterwards.